Welcome to Hyperfixation Investigations, the podcast where two neurospicy best friends take time 2 Saturdays a month to info dump their research deep dive of the week.
Lovingly produced and copyrighted by Wolf and Stag Productions.
Today's fun fact is, quote, museums like the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Louvre house examples of 20-sided dice originating in Ptolemaic Egypt and ancient Rome. The modern version was developed first for the historical wargaming scene and then Dungeons & Dragons, or D&D as it's often known, the first and most popular tabletop fantasy role-playing game, unquote. That's from Ian Tonnett from historians.org.
Good morning, I'm Josh, and I will be captaining this week's mini-sode, D&D History, Part 3 of our mini-series, Geeks, Games, and General Mayhem.
Good evening, I'm Kara, and I'm just along for the ride. For those of you joining us for the first time, how things work here is, Josh will be leading us through a mini lecture on the topic, and we will discuss and ask questions throughout.
Expect tangents throughout. We switch off duties each episode, so next time, expect Kara to take the helm.
Now to our regularly scheduled program. Josh, what have you been hyperfixating on this week?
Well, let me start by saying that this episode is mostly information from memory.
Oh, great.
I have double-checked a few facts here and there, a couple dates and whatnot.
Yeah.
But I really needed to be able to put together a mini-sode. Hopefully I won't ramble too long.
Sure.
But because, we actually want to put out episodes during this month despite September not existing for me.
Right.
So...
Well, this will be early October, but yes.
Well, yes, but because I don't have too much time in September to do research, I figured this made the most sense.
Yes.
So, with that in mind, I figured I may as well just expound upon one of my favorite topics that I don't get to interact with anywhere near as often as I would like. Dungeons and Dragons.
Woohoo!
Now, of course, there are many, many, many tabletop role-playing games out there, tons of which I would love to play.
We just want to play anything.
Yes.
Any TTRPG at this point. We're starved for it.
God. Because, well, of course, you need time to play it.
Yes.
You need people to play it with.
Right.
And you need those people to have consistent time at the same time to play it.
Yeah.
And it's tough. There's a classic joke that like 90% of all tabletop RPG games end, not when the game ends, but because the group has too many scheduling conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some of the others that I want to mention, of course, for their own unique strengths, and just because it's fun to mention some of them, are, of course, Call of Cthulhu, the classic eldritch horror tabletop role-playing game that focuses on fear, insanity, and the overwhelming odds of investigating horrors beyond mortal comprehension.
Great. A real cheerful one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thirsty Sword Lesbians is a narrative-forward game that emphasizes melodrama and queer stories.
Yes.
And then, of course, there are...
Make your own lesbian soap opera.
Yes, basically. Basically. And then there are many TTRPGs for Star Wars, Star Trek, Lord of the Rings, and countless other popular franchises where people just want to play in a game world or setting of their favorite franchise.
Yep.
So there is actually, I don't remember if it's out now or if it's just been in development for a while, an Avatar The Last Airbender tabletop RPG. I know Brandon Sanderson and co. have been working on a Stormlight Archive RPG.
Sure.
I've seen actually a Magnus Archives RPG. Today, though, I'm mostly focusing on D&D because it's, the big one that really deeply defined the early days of the genre. And it's really interesting to me how it's shifted and changed over time and responded to changes within the gaming community. And how, sometimes it's a little behind the curve on some of the changes within the community. But I think I'm going to try starting today with a bit of historical overview. And that's honestly probably going to be a lot of it.
Yeah. There's so much to talk about with D&D and...
No.
Yeah.
So
one mini-sode is not going to be enough.
No, but we're going to see where we go from there.
Yes.
Today.
Maybe we'll start an entire podcast just about D&D.
Oh, God, we could. Now, we may get into some discussion of how certain things are represented in the game mechanics, but it's not going to be a focus.
Cool. Yeah, the game mechanics, it takes a lot of time. And also, I feel like it's easier to understand the game mechanics when you're playing the game.
Right.
Or
witnessing people play the game. Either way.
Yeah.
That's not the focus today.
I've definitely learned more about it from watching Critical Role than I have in all of the other years of...
Just being aware of the game.
Yeah.
Yeah. It can be a lot. But...
So, the history instead.
Yes. So firstly, for anyone who is still listening and has no idea what the hell I'm talking about, congratulations. Thank you for making it this far. It's probably, 5 minutes in?
Who knows?
Something like that.
We have no sense of time.
Yes, I have no sense of time like this. Tabletop role-playing games are generally social games that you and a group of friends play around a table, whether that's a real table or a virtual table.
Real table's better.
But sometimes you need a virtual table because just people can't... Life. Or you're playing with people who live states away. But you collectively agree on a shared world and tell a story together using dice and various rules as a sort of arbiter of fairness. Basically a mashup of board games and improv acting. Kind of like playing pretend as a kid, but with rules and dice, and sometimes math.
Fun!
Yes. Now, the dice and rules and amount of math change depending on which game you're playing, and often who you're playing with, even within that game.
Yeah, there are some people that like more role-playing heavy. There are some people who like more strategy and math heavy.
Yeah, but the core idea is the same. So Dungeons & Dragons, or D&D, is one of the most enduring and popular of these games, and usually takes place in a fantasy world of some kind with tons of classic fantasy tropes and monsters. Though, of course, D&D in particular is famous for being homebrewed to hell and back by its players, going, nah, I can make a space fantasy RPG out of this. I'll just tweak a couple things. It's fine.
Yep.
Kara, you may be surprised today to hear that I'm starting us off in the 1800s today.
Not in Lake Geneva in the 70s?
Nope.
Great. Okay, the 1800s. Let's go.
Yes. In fact, early 19th century Prussia, before the formation of Germany officially as a state.
Cool. Back when there were still German royals.
Yes.
Because they were Prussian royals.
Yes.
Yeah, cool.
So, strategy games have been around for literally thousands of years, right? Like chess, checkers, all sorts of parcheesi. But there are a lot of concepts in modern tabletop role-playing games and wargaming that are typically credited with being started in the early 19th century in Prussia with a game called Kriegspiel.
Okay.
Which literally is German for war game.
Great.
Kriegspiel is a game designed to simulate war as realistically as possible, or at least one particular battle situation.
Alrighty.
And it's played on a large table detailing the terrain of the battle location, and players could move troop units around the board and engage in various kinds of attacks appropriate for that type of unit. And this game is often credited with creating the concept of hit points.
Okay.
Which are used throughout gaming nowadays, video games, board games, tabletop RPGs, to indicate how much health or vitality a character has remaining. But in Kriegspiel, it was denoting how many hits a platoon or group of soldiers could suffer before that platoon was effectively removed from the game, either due to fleeing the battle, dying, or maybe even getting captured. I'd have to double check. I'm not 100% sure if the game had a mechanic for taking prisoners.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't surprise me, given that they were trying to replicate as much of battle as they could.
Right.
With as many rules as they could. And Kriegspiel was not played directly.
What does that mean?
If you and I were to play a game of Kriegspiel, neither of us would actually touch the pieces on the table.
Okay.
We wouldn't even roll any of the dice, though dice were used to determine the outcomes of various events.
Okay.
Rather, the game was played by giving handwritten orders to a neutral umpire.
Interesting.
And that umpire was in charge of enacting the orders given to the troops for both opposing armies, in using dice to determine the outcomes of combat, and often using the dice to determine things like how the weather conditions impact each army. So imagine playing Risk by mail.
Right.
With way more rules.
Okay.
Yes, because of course, if you take a turn and then I take a turn, well, I've seen what you're doing.
Right, you can react to it.
Right. If instead we both only know what the other person did last turn, and then I can go, well, here's what I think you're going to do, it kind of just acts as a means of leveling the playing field and keeping things as fair as possible.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, the umpire is very similar to the Dungeon Master of D&D, or Game Master of other modern TTRPGs, as there is typically one person in charge of handling large-scale world-building and arbitrating conflict, or conflicting rules, and generally everything other than the actions of the players. So, I'm not certain as to the veracity of my next statement, but I seem to remember that the invention of Kriegspiel came during a major downturn in the effectiveness of the Prussian army, and that the game is sometimes credited with helping turn their luck around, since after several years, so many military commanders were constantly playing this game that those people supposedly became measurably better commanders.
Yeah, let's gamify war.
Yeah, well...
We've been doing it forever.
Right. So it's just it was in-depth enough, and it got their creative juices flowing enough as far as military command that, at least supposedly from what I remember, it measurably improved the combat effectiveness of the Prussian army during the second half of the 18th century.
Gotta love that.
Anywho, the game stuck around and is actually still around today. It's also inspired many other similar games as its popularity extended far beyond its Germanic origins. Fast forwarding, there are a ton of war games with various settings and rules and variations. One of the biggest that I'm aware of is Warhammer.
Oh,
yes. Yeah. Which, of course, features a far-flung futuristic setting with tons of alien factions to play as in a very grim, dark universe. Yes. And is kind of...
Isn't that the figurine, the little mini figurine?
Yeah, they have a reputation for being a figurine collecting and painting game, even more than a war game.
Yeah.
But it is a war game, and there are people who will straight up just buy armies, sometimes just to paint them, and sometimes they'll take it to somebody who paints them if they don't want to paint them themselves. But then people love to bring these well-painted little miniature armies where each troop is worth some number of points. So each unit then, or each grouping of troops is worth some number of points to achieve. I think, and I could be wrong because I don't know Warhammer that well as far as how it's played.
Yeah.
I just happen to weirdly know some of the lore, but I think it's you get 1,000 points to spend on however many troops you want to purchase.
Okay.
So that each army should be roughly equivalent in estimated combat power.
Yeah, okay.
But again, that then you get into tons of the strategy of this army versus the strategy of that army is completely different. And these two are always a weird mismatch unless this player decides to go with that strategy.
Right.
I don't know, man. Anywho, we don't need to delve too deep into wargaming anymore because the hobby of wargaming eventually evolves to the point that in 1971, Gary Gygax and Jeff Perrin create a little game called
Dungeons and Dragons.
Wrong.
Yes.
No, they created Chainmail first.
Great.
Chainmail was originally a very small rulebook meant for medieval wargaming.
Okay.
Literally just staging pitched battles with medieval miniature figures. But they released a 14-page supplement that added fantasy elements to the game, including wizards, mythical hero archetypes, elves, orcs, dragons, giants, werewolves, other such creatures.
So, Lord of the Rings and the King Arthur lore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, they encouraged people to restage famous battles from their favorite fantasy novels.
Yes.
They clearly referenced Lord of the Rings, Conan the Barbarian, several other popular fantasy works at the time. They were not going, well, we want to respect the copyright of those things and not even mention them. It was, no. Hey guys.
Fan over it.
Yes.
Yes.
You want to play the Battle of Five Armies? We got you. Here's a bunch of elves. Here's a bunch of dwarves, a bunch of orcs. Go ham. I think Chainmail is where chaos versus order also shows up as an idea within the game.
Nice.
That is very much carried forward into D&D.
Yeah.
Now, chaos versus law is actually very much inspired by Michael Moorcock's Eternal Champion fantasy novels.
Okay.
Which I've at least read the Elric series and really enjoy the weird way that it handles that eternal struggle of law and chaos.
Cool.
Battling for dominion over countless realities. And the Eternal Champion is just archetypical hero who appears in every one of Michael Moorcock's series and is either fighting for the forces of law or the forces of chaos.
Interesting.
Yes. And okay, well, what does the ultimate expression of chaos enacted upon the world mean?
Mm-hmm.
Or the ultimate forces of law enacted upon the world mean for a world in which the other side is driven completely out? Don't
you love how fantasy and sci-fi have become, and this has always been true, but especially in books like that and in TTRPGs and whatever, the exploration of philosophy in a non-formal setting.
Oh, yeah. Big fan.
Yeah.
Anywho, as far as direct inspirations and influences with the game, original D&D, and I think Chainmail, also included several creatures that were very clearly ripped straight from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, including hobbits,
Good,
ents, balrogs, and I think there were even some references to Nazgul, though I don't know if they were officially part of the original list of enemies you could fight.
Okay.
I don't think so. But the Tolkien estate actually sued in 1977.
Yeah, that's not surprising.
Yeah, because copyright infringement, guys.
Yeah.
Come on. And TSR, the company at that time, was literally making a Battle of Five Armies board game. You know, the battle from the end of The Hobbit.
Yeah.
And of course, the Tolkien estate, and Tolkien himself had died a few years prior, so he was not
the one
enforcing
doing
this.
it, right.
But his estate was suing because, hey man, come on. And they did try to include elves, dwarves, orcs, goblins, and a few other things into the lawsuit that ultimately didn't end up making it in.
Because they're not specific enough to be only from Tolkien.
Yes.
Yes.
Whereas hobbits are...
Very specifically.
That's a Tolkien creation through and through.
Yeah.
But, like, elves, dwarves, come on, man. Chill.
Right. Those have existed in fantasy long before Tolkien.
Right. So, as of the 6th printing of original D&D and the 5th printing of Chainmail, hobbits were renamed to halflings.
Yep.
Ents were renamed to treants because they're tree creatures. So, treants.
Yeah.
That's different enough, technically.
Technically.
And balrogs were renamed to balors.
That one seems a little close still.
That one's still a little close. But yeah, in modern D&D, a balor is still a large, fiery demon character that has a lightning sword and a fire whip, instead of a fire sword and a fire whip for a creature of shadow and fire. You know what? It was different enough for the sake of the lawsuit.
Yep.
And we roll with it.
That's all that matters.
Yep. Anywho, D&D, while it did focus on your individual character rather than an army, it still grew out of the wargaming hobby. So a lot of emphasis was placed on combat.
Right.
And then people today still talk about the 3 pillars of D&D being combat, exploration, and roleplay.
Sure.
And what is particularly interesting is that as time has gone on and the game has changed, there has been a shift towards roleplay and away from the other 2 pillars. Part of the fun has always been the combat between characters and other monsters. But the culture of the game has changed a little bit over time from the more dungeon crawl focused games, where some of the biggest struggles were just figuring out how to carry the loot out of the dungeon that you just raided without being murdered by the army of kobolds that camped near the exit of the dungeon.
Yeah.
And instead, a lot of people in the hobby became much more interested in telling a story, a more narrative-focused play. There is also a focus in the rules on building a character's personality a little bit more.
Yeah.
Though, in the recent editions, it's still something the game kind of struggles with, as it's clear that the game designers have a particular idea in mind of what they expect the players, like the average player, to be.
Okay.
It's just that has shifted a little bit over time because of the culture shift around the game.
Right, which is also where you start getting a lot of homebrew stuff coming in.
Yeah, a lot of homebrew, which homebrew is just the term used in the community for anything made by the community and not by the official game designers to kind of supplement or substitute elements of the game. One small example is actually the Ranger, because the Ranger used to be expected to be an extremely useful, even crucial member of the party, because navigating the wilds,
right,
even getting to a dungeon or getting to the place of adventure was a dangerous task and an adventure in and of itself. If you go off the path and you don't have a ranger, you're screwed.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, while the ranger has changed over time alongside everything else, there's still some element of expected utility with the ranger that has been somewhat diminished because a lot of tables nowadays changed what is typical in traveling the wild.
Sure.
Like, a lot of people will still have random combat encounters in the woods, but it's far less common to actually have a table spend multiple gaming sessions worried about whether or not they have enough food rations to survive.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that is something that really has diminished nowadays. Not to say that people don't still do that. Plenty of tables still do, but it's less common, and it's just one small example.
We already struggle to survive in real life. We don't want to be playing it too.
Yeah. Though, that was part of the expectation at the time. And in fact, I think they originally recommended using was it called a wilderness survival or a camping survival game made by Avalon Hill? Literally a completely different company, completely different game. And they went, hey, go ahead, use their like camping survival system to figure out your food rations and whatnot when they originally released.
Nice.
And then eventually just started kind of incorporating those ideas into their own.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's take a quick bathroom break before we roll for initiative. You may have noticed that we once again called this one a mini-sode instead of episode. Since life is crazy right now and the month of September basically doesn't exist for me, this episode is like our last two episodes in that it is intended to be a slightly more bite-sized segment of our content, but we should be back to our typical episode length after this one.
For those who appreciate social media updates and episode reminders, please follow us on YouTube at Hyperfixation Investigations Podcast or Blue Sky at HI-podcast. We also have resurrected our Instagram and Facebook and have added TikTok at HI_podcast. So go check us out on those platforms and follow along, or sign up for our email list at our website to ensure you never miss a thing.
And please leave a comment or review on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or even on our website. We love to hear from you and it helps us a lot. If you would like to contribute to us directly and help us continue growing, consider subscribing to our podcast on Patreon. And with that, let's explore some more backstory. Speaking of editions, there are 5 editions of the game.
There are 5.5 editions of the game.
Well, in a very real way, there are 9 editions of the game. So, what is now called OD&D, or Original D&D, was released in 1974 and only featured 3 character classes.
Oh my god.
Fighting men, magic users, and clerics. And you could only play as a human, elf, dwarf, or hobbit, which of course was later changed to halfling.
Of course.
But a 1975 supplement officially created the world of Greyhawk, which is a world that still exists as a playable setting for games today. And it added the thief, which then cemented the classic fighter, mage, cleric, thief group dynamic, which kind of became the expectation. Every party should have someone to fulfill each of these 4 roles, even if in later editions, they're using different class options to fulfill those roles.
Yeah.
Still the idea of, okay, you have somebody to handle the up-close fighting, you have somebody to be a mage, some kind of magic user, you have somebody to be a healer, and you have somebody for all the sneaky shit. Yes. Now, Greyhawk also added the paladin as a holy warrior, and there was an additional 1975 supplement.
Because you have to start beating the the Christian anti-fans.
Oh, yeah.
Who are like, this is witchcraft and demon following Satan and whatever. It's like, no, we have holy warriors. It's a good thing. Man,
I didn't even get into like the satanic panic in today.
No, that's
I'm not even getting into that today. But the satanic panic has always cracked me up because, guys, yeah, I know there's like weird monsters and demons on the front of these books because those are enemies that you're fighting.
Right.
Like
it's just math.
That's part of the idea. It's just math and graph paper and improv acting. And okay, chill. Anywho, the satanic panic is always amusing to me, but I think it was more a thing of the 80s than it was of the 70s.
Sure.
Not the focus today.
Yes.
In 1975, there was also a supplement in the world of Blackmoor, which is not one that I am really familiar with. I don't think it's persisted as much, but it introduced the monk as a subclass of fighter, I think.
Okay.
And the assassin as a subclass of thief.
Okay.
Yes. And of course, in modern D&D, assassin and thief are subclass of rogue.
Yes.
They've kind of renamed, then reallocated some of those things. And monk is its own class nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
But it was not until the 1976 supplement that druids were added to the game.
Woohoo!
In the same time as...
It will surprise nobody that that's my favorite to play.
Oh, of course. No, druids are phenomenal.
Druids and rogues, man.
Yeah, it's fair. But they added druids at the same time as demons and psionics, which, so if you could see the look...
I just gave a confused look.
Yes. Psionics are basically just like telepathic and telekinetic stuff that isn't really officially supported in current editions of the game.
Okay.
But they kind of got really big in the previous editions. And some people still like to homebrew psionics back in. And psionics it's not like they're gone per se. They just have taken on they've been like reshuffled into other forms of magic. But basically, it was any kind of like mental psychic magic.
Got it.
1977 saw the release of Advanced D&D, or AD&D, which officially added the Bard class, and the core rulebooks were established as the Player's Handbook, the Monster Manual, and the Dungeon Master's Guide, which more or less become the 3 core rulebook names for most editions moving forward.
Okay.
And then AD&D added the alignment chart as we know it today, with 9 boxes in a kind of Punnett square, where you can be either lawful, neutral, or chaotic, and good, neutral, or evil. So OD&D only had lawful, neutral, and chaotic.
Got it.
In the very more Morkockian style of law versus chaos. And it was kind of assumed that law was good and chaos was bad. But then because people kind of took that and ran with it in ways that were unexpected from Gary Gygax at that time, they went, all right, sure. Well, I guess we'll add in good and evil explicitly because I guess people are taking lawful and chaotic to be less of a good versus evil and more of a rule of law versus like rule by strength kind of it. You know, the alignment chart and defining exactly what it means for a character to be of a particular alignment has been a never-ending argument with endless interpretations since the very moment of its inception.
I'm pretty sure it's like a very personal decision too.
Oh my god. Everyone has their own version of how they interpret the alignment chart a little bit.
Yeah.
Where kind of my idea for it has largely been lawful is more belief in like systems and codes, where chaotic is typically more
gut instincts and values
that are like, if something's happening that I don't like and it's outside the system, I'm going to do something about it.
Right.
Whatever. Where good and evil is, I think, a little bit more straightforward in the selfless versus selfish.
Sure.
And at the very least, you can take that to its obvious extremes of altruistic versus
destructive.
And enjoying the harm of others for evil. Yeah. But of course, everyone has little variations, and there are plenty of characters I've seen where they go, people online will say, this character is obviously neutral evil. And it's like, well, okay, they're selfish. It's taking a very non-extreme version of the scales. So it's, again, it depends on who you're talking to and exactly how they want to apply it. But either way, alignment doesn't really get used too much in the most recent editions of D&D.
Which is so sad because it's so fun.
It is, but also...
I think it's a good guide. It's a good conversation to have about your character with yourself and with your GM so that you can be like, okay, I'm going to lean these ways towards things, but it entirely depends on the situation, the growth of your character throughout the campaign.
Right.
Somebody who starts off one thing can morph with, the right justifications and experiences and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that's...
But it's like my mom would call it table work in theater.
Yes.
And in acting. You need to have some idea because that's every person has some values regarding those things. They lean one way or the other. Like, I'm a firm believer in you have to earn my respect. You don't automatically get it just because you're older than me or more educated or whatever. I will be polite to you, but politeness is different than true respect.
Yes.
So like those kinds of conversations about your character can kind of be alignment conversations, even if you're not using the specific charts and stuff.
Right. Well, and that's one of the reasons that I really enjoy that 5th edition specifically calls out bonds, flaws, traits, and ideals for your character.
Yeah.
Which, and, some of the randomly rolled ideas for that per class or background are a little odd.
Yeah.
But they can still be a great starting point to help you figure things out. And having those clearly defined, I think, is a great way to help figure out a narrative focus and like who your character is, like you're saying with table work.
Yeah.
But alignment, I think part of the reason that we've shifted away from alignment a little bit is because, especially early days, there was a lot of focus on, well, no, you're a lawful good character. You physically cannot do that.
Right.
Like
it became restrictive.
Right. And that's the problem.
Yeah.
If it's restrictive, if it's prescriptive, then it is potentially problematic and restrictive on the character. But if it is about how your character is perceived like the way that your character generally acts,
Right.
treating it as a generalization rather than a restriction,
Yes.
I think is still a perfectly viable and fun way to use it.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, it definitely, even in that, it strays pretty far from what the original intention of alignment seems to have been in early D&D, because I think Gary Gygax at one point wanted all creatures of a shared alignment to speak a special shared language.
Oh, really?
Yeah, especially in like OD&D days where it's just law, chaos, and neutrality.
Yeah.
So like all creatures of chaos share a dark and twisted speech that only they know. And only fellow people who have studied the language of chaos understand. Anywho, AD&D 2nd edition then came out in 1989.
So you get a bunch of sub-editions,
Yes.
essentially, in the 70s.
Well, because you get OD&D,
Yeah.
AD&D, and actually I haven't even really mentioned there was also a basic D&D that was part of like a starter kit that people made with very simplified rules. But then there was also AD&D 2nd edition in 89, followed by a revised 2nd edition in 1995, and by 2000, when 3rd edition was released, they stopped calling it Advanced D&D and just called it 3rd edition, which may in part be due to the fact that TSR was officially acquired by Wizards of the Coast in 1997, which was definitely necessary considering TSR started 1997, $30 million in debt.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't remember the full reason for the financial downturn of TSR, but I seem to remember it having something to do with a combination of too many settings and supplement books that they were printing out in such a way that they were kind of competing with themselves.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah, and combined with I think there was some sort of financial arrangement with gaming stores that ended up resulting in discounts that hurt the company in the long run.
Right.
Where I think it was like if certain gaming stores ordered within a certain time frame, they got huge discounts on certain products. But again, I haven't looked into that too much recently, and I don't remember the details per se. Anywho, 3rd edition also marks a very specific change to the game in that all character races can finally be all character classes. So
they used to be restricted?
Oh, yes. Race as class was very much a thing in OD&D, AD&D, and even 2nd edition. Halflings in OD&D could only take the Fighting Man class and could only reach level 4. So not only were they restricted in what classes they could take, they were restricted in what level they could attain.
Odd.
It does feel odd for us, but it was enforcing a very specific type of fantasy.
Okay.
Early D&D was very human-centric. So like humans could be, I think, most classes.
Okay.
But then like certain classes were meant for certain other fantasy creatures.
Right.
And that, okay, well, yeah, obviously these creatures are better at this thing because in Tolkien, they're more likely to do that.
Right.
And
sure.
Well, in a lot of the fantasy stories we know, with human realms abutting against various fantastical realms and other creatures, those creatures are the weird and mysterious ones that are only ever this thing. So obviously, they can only be that class.
Mm.
And so, yeah, it was very much enforcing a very particular type of fantasy that was expected by the game designers.
Yeah.
But as the cultural zeitgeist shifted and people wanted to play anything and everything,
yeah,
and the worlds that people were playing in got more diverse. 3rd edition, dwarf, elf, halfling, dragonborn, half-elf, gnome, you could all be anything. Any of the available character classes, and you can all reach max level instead of being capped based on character ancestry.
Because that feels icky a little bit.
It does feel a little bioessentialist, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And a little eugenics-y, which is kind of a problem that D&D has always struggled with in some of those decisions.
Yeah.
Especially looking back, which is why it's nice to see that, yeah, they have eventually shifted some of those things.
They're getting there.
They're working on it.
They're trying.
So, again, sometimes it's a bit slower than others. And edition 3.5, which most of the time when people talk about 3rd edition, they're talking about 3.5.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yes. It was released in 2003 and is often remembered as a very crunchy system.
Crunchy?
Crunchy in that after a while, there were tons of rulebook expansions with tons of rules about everything and a million little numbers to remember, and arbitrating rule conflicts became a famously Herculean task at times. But people loved it.
Well, that's good.
Right? Because the dedication to having a rule for every possible scenario and being able to logic through exactly how even the most esoteric situations should pan out.
So 3rd edition is for the autistics.
Yes.
At your table.
Yes.
I'm sorry, that's just so...
No, 3.5
I say that with love.
Yes. 3.5 is famously, and like, I don't know if 3.5 is actually that much more rules heavy than earlier editions of AD&D, because of course I haven't played those editions, but I did play at least a couple games of 3.5 at one point.
Yeah.
And yeah, it got a little crunchy, but it wasn't, I didn't think it was too crazy.
Yeah.
It was still like, oh, everything made sense. It was just, yeah, there's a lot to keep track of. But 4th edition in 2008 was kind of viewed oddly as a bit of a bust by a lot of the community.
Okay.
Now, I've heard plenty of stories of people who had never played before really loving 4th edition, but it kind of alienated some of the old guard in the way that it went about changing certain rules, and it kind of dramatically overhauled a lot of the game system.
Okay.
So naturally, a lot of people who had been playing forever.
Is that kind of where it really shifted to more role-playing heavy, or?
The culture had been shifting for decades.
Yeah.
I mean, hell, even my dad playing in the 80s talks about some of the worlds he was building for the stories he wanted to craft for his friends, right? So it's kind of always been a thing that the culture has been pushing more towards roleplay. Part of it just depends on exactly what that roleplay looks like and how the game designers expect that roleplay to occur. It's not that roleplay was never a big part of the game. It's just how people expected these things to be done at the table. And what people expect from the game has shifted over time.
Okay.
But yeah, 4th edition did feature at least some more of that shift. And I think 3rd edition did as well, especially with the getting rid of the race as class idea. Yeah, 4th edition, because it had a lot of overhaul in the game system, things like you get these abilities per encounter instead of per like 10-minute interval, or like these spells last per encounter instead of like one encounter instead of they last for 1 minute or 10 minutes or an hour.
Okay.
The language of the game shifted in such a way that a lot of people from the old guard were understandably a bit taken aback. Ultimately, I think that's most of why 4th edition gets some extra hate that I don't know that it necessarily deserves. It's just, it's a different game.
Yeah.
But the lessons learned from designing 4th edition definitely made 5th edition possible and made it what it is. Because 5th edition, then released in 2014, was specifically designed to be a more approachable version of the game, but did go back in many ways to a lot of what 3.5 was at its core.
Okay.
But just trying to be more approachable for the general public.
Well, a little less crunchy.
Yeah, less crunchy and a little bit easier to learn. And then last year, in 2024, they released a kind of 5.5, but I think officially they're calling it 5e 2024, which I just call it 5.5.
Just call it 5.5. Just call it what all of us are calling it. Why?
Yeah. Well, I can't tell if they don't want to acknowledge that it is a change to the game system, even though there's a ton of rule updates.
Right.
I think it's meant to be backward compatible with 5th edition, just like, oh, we're updating things, guys. Anywho, I have just a couple extra things I want to mention.
Yeah.
One other notable influence on the game is the fantasy author Jack Vance.
Okay.
Who wrote the Dying Earth series. Vancian magic systems very heavily inspired the early D&D magic system. In fact, it basically is a Vancian magic system at its core, where earlier editions of D&D, even up to, I think, 3rd edition or 3.5, I think, used a spell slot system, specifically where if I want to cast Fireball 3 times today, I have to prepare Fireball 3 times. I don't just have Fireball prepared and Lightning Bolt and
then I can use them however.
Right. It was much more of a, no, you prepare exactly the number of spells for exactly the number of times you think you're going to want to use them today. But you only have a certain number of slots per level.
That would drive me crazy.
Yes. And, oh, you wanted to cast Plant Growth today? How many times do you have it prepared? Have you cast it already? Mark it off. You can't cast it again today. You didn't prepare it twice. But in at least 5th edition, it is more of the, you have this many spell slots and you have this many spells prepared. As long as you have a spell slot left for the appropriate level of spell, you can cast any of the spells of that level.
Right.
It's a little more forgiving and a little more flexible nowadays. but it very much was from Jack Vance's Dying Earth series, where I think it was a kind of like techno nanobot magic situation.
Oh, interesting.
And you actually had to like contain the spells in your brain. And so you only had a certain amount of space for them, and more powerful spells took up more space in your brain.
That's interesting.
The last little thing I have is armor class has changed a lot. In that modern D&D, armor class is just, how difficult is it to hit that enemy? You swing your sword, you roll a 20-sided die, and you add whatever modifier.
Yeah.
And as long as you meet or beat the number, you hit them.
Okay.
Earlier editions had THAC0.
What does that mean?
To hit armor class 0, everything was assumed to start off at a base of 0 and could go negative, but it was kind of centered around 0 as armor class and adjusted based on the character's armor or, innate shell hardness for like a turtle or something, or like an insect creature that has thick chitin might have an armor class of like -1. There's a lot of like weird subtraction going on to figure out.
There's too much.
I'm sure someone could explain it to me, but because I've never needed to?
Yeah.
I don't know, man. But it feels weird regardless. How about I just roll a die, add one number to it, or like 1 or 2 numbers to it, and then you tell me, is this number bigger than the number I need?
Right. End of story.
Otherwise, unless you have any other questions or anything else we need to get to today.
I don't think so.
It's kind of a little historical overview. Thanks for listening, guys. Take it easy out there.
Bye-bye. That's a wrap on Minisode 24 D&D. If you'd like to delve further into this topic, our research sources and related images are posted on our website, hyperfixation-investigations.com. Again, that's www.hyperfixation-investigations.com. Thanks so much for listening.
Follow us on social media for updates and check out our Patreon to support us directly. Join our Discord community and receive other special perks.
See you next time, and remember, what's a little info dumping between friends?